Well, one of the reasons we have these dietetics associations, and they argue for plant-based diets. They say that the healthy benefits of a vegetarian diet, and they even say that it was a well-designed vegan diet should be the best diet for you. And yet they recognize, well, you do have to be careful with B12, D3, K2, vitamin A, iron, and all these other sorts of things. But if you take care of those and you supplement, it should be fine, which is a bit ridiculous for a nutritionist and a nutritional body to suggest that. And they'd also say about the low carbohydrate diet, this is a fad diet, there's no scientific evidence, and yet there are thousands, literally thousands of studies in humans showing the benefits, the medical benefits of a ketogenic diet in humans. And they've actually had to change that recently, because now a ketogenic diet is in the national schedule for diabetes treatment in Australia. It's part of the guidelines, right? So they had to sort of walk that back. But you see the sort of the biases, right? So the problem is that the DAA, the Dietitians Association of Australia, they are highly compromised. So they basically they show no evidence for why a low carbohydrate diet is a fad, but then they say a vegan diet, which is nutritionally devoid, that this is a good diet for these reasons. And they listed previously, before they took this down, they listed 4 studies. Every single one of those studies was actually funded by or written by someone from Sanitarium Foods, someone from the food companies, or someone from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which we'll come to, and that's very important. A lot of these studies, majority of these studies, come from compromised sources. A lot of them will come from processed food companies that are trying to push their own agenda. Coca-Cola alone spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research every year than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in America. That's just Coca-Cola. There's Nestle, there's Pepsi, there's Kellogg's, there's Sanitarium, there's all these other sorts of food companies. They're all pumping out research. They're all funding research. They're all paying universities to do research. Okay, so the majority of these research studies are biased, or at least potentially biased. And what do they look at? They say, eat more plants. They're good for you. When people eat more plants, then they're healthier. Compared to what, though? They say, well, you take away meat. But is that the only thing they took away? Because what they're really comparing it to is a processed food diet, where people aren't eating fruits and vegetables. Maybe there's some meat in it, like in a bun of a hamburger or something like that, with some trans fats dipped and boiled vegetables, potatoes, and a sugary drink, or artificial sweeteners, right? So meat is the smallest part of that. So you go away from that, and you go to whole food plant-based diet, and people improve. I don't doubt it, okay? But that's not because you got rid of meat. That's because you got rid of all the plant-based processed foods. If we go back to our friends the Maasai, they were part of the only study that I know of that actually compared what we're talking about, which is a whole food meat-based diet and a whole food plant-based diet. And that was in 1931. Really haven't done anything since then. And that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And there's a British study, and they looked at the Maasai, and they had a very good example there, because the Maasai are largely eating meat, blood, dairy, and not much else. But their neighbors, the Akikuyu, were almost the polar opposite. They ate a lot of plants. They ate a lot of tubers and leaves and seeds and nuts and all these sorts of things. So they were largely plant-based, alive at the same time in the same area. And this is late 1920s, 1930. So this wasn't the era of industrial agriculture and crop farming and pesticides and insecticides and fertilizers, all these sorts of things. It's a vegan's dream. They're out on a commune in the middle of Africa, just living off the land, right? And it was also very interesting because they were genetically similar or near identical, because they actually intermarried. And so they would go back and forth. So genetically, they were a very similar population. They ate very different diets. Everything else was about the same. So it's a very good, somewhat self-controlled trial. And they looked at them, they looked at their health, they looked at their development, and they found that the Maasai were on average 5 inches taller, brains were larger, they were 50% stronger, and they were on average 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass. There is no fat on these guys. It's only lean body mass. They had full, well-developed jaws, no tooth decay, big, bright white teeth. They don't have dentists. They don't have teeth whiteners or anything like that. They're eating what they're supposed to eat, and their mouth is working the way it's supposed to work. The opposite was true of the Akikuyu. They were shorter, they were weaker, they were more sickly, they had crooked teeth, decaying teeth, they had vitamin deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, they were anemic, they were getting infections, they were getting diabetes, they were getting all these problems that the Maasai simply were not. And the British tried to supplement them and say, okay, well, we'll take care of your supplements. This is what the dietitians say. Okay, this is a deficient diet, but if you supplement, then you'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine. They didn't actually improve their health. It wasn't until they replaced the plants with meat that they actually improved their health outcomes. So that's the only study that I'm aware of that actually compares what we're talking about. A meat-based diet, a whole food meat-based diet, and a whole food plant-based diet. The other studies are looking at comparing processed food garbage diet with more plants, right? Because you're comparing it to the norm. That's what they're looking at. You eat more plants and you do better than the average person. The average person is sick. The average person is unhealthy. 93% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease. 70% are overweight or obese. So you don't want to compare yourself to the norm. That's not a good bar to put yourself against. So why is the DAA doing this? Well, it starts about 150 years ago, crazy enough, with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is very, very strange. And a lot of this, most of this is coming from the work of Belinda Fettke, who's the wife of Dr. Gary Fettke, who's a Tasmanian orthopedic surgeon. And she really broke the case open on why in God's name we are having this shoved down our throats for so long. That's it. So Ellen G. White was a prophetess, and she had so-called vision from God. And she was told that meat was evil, meat caused lustful feelings, it increased sexual urges, and of course lust was a sin. And so therefore meat was a sin. And it was as bad as smoking and drinking and all these other sorts of substances. And so, and it caused you, it caused you to feel in a lustful way, and this was bad. She was influenced by Sylvester Graham of Graham Crackers, who also advocated for a bland diet to suppress sexual urges. And this was in their writings, specifically was to suppress sexual urges because sex was evil. And and also this was part of the temperance movement as well. So calling about self-vice, which is masturbation. This was thought to be one of the greatest sins you could commit against yourself. And she wrote a book called An Appeal to Mothers, where she said that if your child masturbates, it's like putting a gun to his breast and pulling the trigger. They're just dead on that instant. And so they took this very seriously. And one of her little proteges was a guy named John Harvey Kellogg. And he was her typesetter when he was 12 years old and set the type for these books that she was writing. So he was ingrained in this. And you might recognize the name, grew up to become Dr. Kellogg. And he and his brother founded Kellogg Cereals. And he invented Kellogg cereals while he was the director of the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan in order to give food that would suppress sexual urges and desires. That was his mission. He also would see parents who would bring in their children who were masturbating and wanted to stop them. He'd put them on a vegan diet, put them on a plant-based diet, give them a bunch of these cornflakes in order to suppress their sexual urges. And he would also circumcise them without anesthetic. Boys and girls. He would actually cut the clitoris off of girls. Or use acid or other caustic substances to scar and score the clitoris and labia to make it painful to them and punish them and to make it painful for them to do it again. And he actually pushed this on the rest of the country. He thought this was a very healthful thing. He convinced the medical establishment in America to push for male circumcision. He tried it for female circumcision, saying this was better for their health. He didn't tell them what his actual motives were, which was to suppress masturbation. But that's what it was. And so he convinced the medical establishment that it was actually in the health of the child's, in the best interest of the child, to circumcise young boys. And this is why most Americans are circumcised. It's starting to change because people have become aware of this more recently. He tried to do it for women too. He thankfully didn't get through with that one, but this is where these people's minds were at. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church has actually set up more than 20 different plant-based food companies. They are the origin of the processed food movement. So Kellogg and his brother made cornflakes and a lot of other different sorts of cereals that came along with this. There was something like 36 different cereal companies came up around Battle Creek, Michigan during this time because they were all influenced by Kellogg. Kellogg's was an extremely influential doctor and scientist in America. He was sort of a doctor to the stars. Back in the 1800s, early 1900s, presidents and movie stars and politicians would come to see him at his sanitarium in Battle Creek. And he was extremely influential. He really pushed his case very hard. He had a lot of very, very strange predilections, like enemas. He always put everyone on enemas. He gave himself 2 enemas a day. He had a high-powered machine that could pump in 60 liters of water in and out of the rectum in less than a minute. So he would do this. He thought this was part of good health, and then being on vegan. So he had very peculiar, very very unique sort of thoughts. But he was very influential, and so a lot of other cereal companies came up as a result of this. One was Sanitarium Foods here in Australia. It's one of the larger food producers, processed food producers in Australia. They are still owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They still benefit from tax exemption status because they're part of a religious organization, and their mission statement is to push a plant-based agenda for this religious ideology. They don't tell you that, but that is what it is. And they say, oh, it's for healthful, this, that, and the other, and blah, blah. No, it's not. It is to stop you from being horny, basically. So how they influence our diet. Okay, so that's the origin of the processed food industry. But they've had so much more influence since then. We know now that they've had undue influence on most of the major dietary guidelines and decision-making processes of the last century. And in fact, it gets worse than that, because the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in America was actually founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church members. So the entire field of nutritional sciences and dietetics was founded by these people who are religiously anti-meat. So it's always been about plant. This is why when I grew up next to a nutritional college, one of the top nutritional colleges in America called Bastyr, everyone coming out of there was just whole food vegan, whole food vegan, whole food vegan. And I knew that was insane, because we're apex predators. Apex predators definitionally eat animals. And so I knew that was silly, but I never thought wait, why and how are PhDs in nutrition being taught that we're supposed to only eat plants when they're deficient in nutrients, and we clearly evolved on meat? Now I know why. Because they were founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Adventist Nutritional and Dietetics International Association. These are very influential around the world as well. Loma Linda Medical School and University and Medical Center was, again, a Seventh-day Adventist church. When I was applying to medical school back in 2008, I remember I was living in California at the time, and I was looking around at the different California schools, and I came across Loma Linda, and I said, okay, who are these guys? I was not even allowed to apply. It says, in order to apply, you must be a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You can't even apply. You have to get a letter from your deacon in order to apply. So that's who they are. But then you have the McGovern Committee, or the McGovern Report, which was the original attack against fat and meat. This was the first government-sanctioned advice to the public to say, hey, you need to reduce the amount of fat that you're eating. You need to get more healthy grains and vegetables and fruits and things like that. So the problem with that is the main author in that report was a Seventh-day Adventist member. Okay? And then we have Nathan Pritikin. Does anybody know who Pritikin is? The Pritikin diet, that was for decades thought to be the gold standard in heart disease prevention diet. Well, he was a professor at Loma Linda University. I don't know if he was a Seventh-day Adventist member, but he was certainly influenced by them, and he taught at a school that does not allow anybody except Seventh-day Adventists to go there. So he at least had some very strong ties with them, and he read all the books of Ellen G. White, which were like dozens. She was just a prolific lunatic of a writer. She just wrote absolutely insane things. And he also testified for the McGovern Committee. These are the people that are pushing forward, the food pyramid sort of ideas, right? This is where they came from. They also wrote the first textbook on nutritional science at the university level. Okay, so they started the institution. They wrote the textbook, they wrote the curriculum, and they have been perpetuating it ever since. That book is still in print in its current edition. That current edition is still being taught. Sally Norton, who people may know, she wrote a book called Toxic Superfoods. It's all about all the different toxins that are in plants. She was a nutritionist. She went to Cornell University, an Ivy League institution in America, and studied nutrition, got a master's, and she was just learning, oh, just eat plants, just eat plants, just eat plants. And she was getting sicker and sicker and sicker until she almost died in her 30s from the amount of toxins that were in these plants that she was eating that were supposedly the most healthy thing that she could eat. That was her textbook. The most recent edition that she was taught at Cornell was that textbook, the most recent edition of that textbook. They have been at the ground floor and influencing nutritional thought for 100 years. It gets worse. So now they're invading into the medical sciences as well. So all doctors have been influenced by this. Oh, you'd have to eat less meat, eat less saturated fat. We've all heard this. We all know this. Most of us have been taught this, and most people have pushed it. Most doctors still do push this, but it's gotten worse because lifestyle medicine was founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 2003, and it was for this direct purpose of pushing a plant-based agenda in medicine. So it sounds good. You want to change your diet, you want to eat right, you want to exercise. Okay? Sounds good. I advocate for the same thing. But what they're telling you to eat is more grains, more fruits, more vegetables, less meat. Go vegan, start exercising, and you'll be right, and you won't be. So this was founded by the Seventh-day Adventists. They founded the specialty. They write the exams, they write the curriculum, and they are still running the show. This is all over the world now. In basically every Western country, this is now a specialty having exams. It's lifestyle medicine's here in Australia, it's in America, it's in Europe as well. All of these processed food companies have ties to exercise as medicine. Exercise as medicine was founded by Coca-Cola. So they're trying to get you away from thinking, oh, what I eat is a problem, I should fix my diet. Just exercise. That's the only thing that matters. Calories in, calories out. You know, if you want to drink a Coke or eat a pizza or something like that, it's fine as long as you're moving enough. That's okay. No, it's not okay. You know, is it okay to exercise if you do heroin? Does that just cancel that out? You know, no, there are things that you can put in your body that are harmful and you should not put in your body, and they're trying to sell them to you. Okay, and unfortunately, even the DAA here in Australia, they are very much compromised. They have a corporate partnership with Nestle, Kellogg, Sanitarium, and Freedom Foods, and it's in that corporate partnership that they have to push that agenda, saying that carbs are healthy, grains are healthy, even sugar is healthy, because they sell that. The CEO of the DAA actually personally targeted Dr. Gary Fettke in Tasmania because he had the audacity to actually cure his patients of diabetes so that he didn't have to amputate their legs. Right? So he was an orthopedic surgeon, he was doing a lot of amputations, and he was the only person that was basically willing to see these poor people and do what needed to be done. Everyone else, they just didn't want to deal with it. So he was the only one stepping up to the plate, and he came across low carb medicine. He saw what it could do for people. He started recommending this to patients, and what do you know? They didn't need the amputations that they used to. So he's literally saving people's lives and limbs, saving millions of dollars to the public healthcare system, and he comes under attack, and he was attacked and abused by APRA for years. And the CEO of the DAA personally called his medical director and said, well, you need to get rid of this guy, he's a problem. All right, and that actually came out. There was minutes from different meetings with the processed food companies and some of these other sort of nutritionists that the Low Carb Down Under organization actually came across, and they found that they specifically singled out Dr. Fettke by name and said, we need to silence this guy. This is one of those low carb doctors. Our cereal sales are down. We have to take him out. Okay, so these people are militant. They don't care about you. They don't care about nutrition. They care about their bottom line or their religious ideology.